first law of thermodynamics.
Sorry. Keep going.
So does anyone want to take a shot? Really? No
What was the
one?
question?
Laws of thermodynamics.
The first law of thermodynamics is the law of conservation of energy. It states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. Now, what do I mean when I say energy? Energy can be described as the ability to do work, where work...
I'll take over from here. Thank you for covering for me. Sorry I was late. You find all this a little boring? Or do you already know all this stuff? It's okay. I find it a little bit boring. It is. That's up to you. You know what true boredom looks like? Your life in 5 years' time, when you realize you haven't paid attention, and you'll find yourself working for other people, likely a middle management person who takes out their frustrations and their despair on you while you're trying to sell products and services that you don't care about. There's some multinational corporation who doesn't actually give a flying fuck. Excuse my language, if you exist. But I care. Because for this fleeting moment, what's your name?
Riley?
Riley. That's right, Riley. For this fleeting moment, Riley and everybody else who's still on your phones, put them away. You get to sit in a classroom and ponder the mysteries of our existence. That is great. Now, I'm not expecting you to understand everything. I'm not a cruel man. But I do expect you to respect the opportunity. Pay attention. That's all.
John Lilly once put it this way: there are no limits at all to the human mind whatsoever, except those we impose on ourselves because of our beliefs. And those limits are also beliefs to be transcended. And that's a view that suggests that the possibilities of human transformation are virtually infinite. And we have no way of knowing the outer horizon of what it means to be human.
And really, to understand all this, everything, you have to go very, very deep into a study of history, consciousness, neurophysiology, everything. You have to be the supreme eclectic type of leaning, and you really have to be wanting to know who you are and what everything's about.
And the thing that you'll find when you go to sacred sites, if you're very humble about it, is that you are on a personal journey, and the sacred site will respond to you in a way that is appropriate only to you. The information is always what you are searching for. And it's the intent you give that energy that defines whether it is used for right action or not. And it is inside these sacred spaces that you will be reminded that you are a god, that you are a bright star.
So what you're trying to do is move through the course without ricocheting off walls or creating karma. You're trying to slide through things smoothly. How do you do that? It's called flowing. There's a technique that you can do that will allow you to touch some part of your inner being that has more knowledge than your conscious state does.
So what's your pitch?
Your company is the fastest growing snack food brand in the entire world. Your macaroni and cheese puffs are a huge hit. Your stock price is riding high because of record-breaking sales. And right about now, you're wondering, what the fuck do I need these guys for?
That's because your main competitor, Unified Grain Mills, they're in the process right now of testing a copycat product, mac and cheesies. And they have 3 times your marketing reach. So when they enter the space, you're gonna see a huge dent in your sales. Your earnings in Q4 and beyond are all gonna take a massive hit.
But we can buy you time.
Yeah, I'm listening.
It's called a mass psychogenic event. In layman's terms, simple hysteria. Our operatives can easily infiltrate Unified's test groups and identify recruits prone to suggestion.
Is it hot? Are you hot? No, not really.
Then, with a few carefully placed reactions, we would induce a nightmare scenario for them.
Yeah, it's hot. Oh, feeling a little queasy, too.
But I guess it's a little warmer than I'd like.
Hey, what's in this shit?
We're confident such an event
I want to puke. What is this? Crap. I don't feel so good.
would derail Unified's release of mac and cheesies for at least a year.
I'm nauseous. Can I go to the bathroom? Sir, could you please stay in your seat?
I'm gonna throw up.
That is the craziest shit I've ever heard. You can really do that?
Yeah, it's science.
Not only can we do it, we guarantee it. Where do I sign?
I think congratulations are in order.
You too, brother. I just wanted to show you something that I've been batting around, all right? Sure. It's a pretty interesting metric that I found on a study by Stanford about the data that Facebook uses. Sure. Now, it was designed to determine if someone's preferences, so their behavior, really, could be predicted by a computer model based solely on their likes. And according to the study, the model was able to predict someone's behavior better than a coworker after just 10 likes. After 150 likes, it beat their parents. After 300 likes, the model was more accurate than their spouse.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Like, we know psychology, behavior, and we sure know how to make money at it. But this big data thing, it can just figure it out bigger, better, faster than us. Now, we could build a simulation and just take all of that raw data, taking it easily from somewhere like social media or databases or online polls, and we could process it all for sale to businesses or politicians or law enforcement, governments. I mean, they would pay huge money for whatever that data could tell them about people and how to predict or motivate their behaviors. I mean, you can see where this is all gonna go, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, yes. But is this really what we want to be doing?
John, this is what we're doing already with these rich pricks, isn't it? Using our knowledge against them. This is just bigger and much more profitable. I mean, this is the future. You know I'm right. So let's be a part of it. All right, will you just promise me that you're gonna think about it, okay?
I don't need to. I'm in.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh God, what are we gonna call it?
Those were the years after the ice caps had melted because of the greenhouse gases. And the oceans had risen to drown so many cities along all the shorelines of the world. Amsterdam, Venice, New York, forever lost. Millions of people were displaced. Climate became chaotic. Hundreds of millions of people starved in poorer countries. Elsewhere, a high degree of prosperity survived when most governments in the developed world introduced legal sanctions to strictly licensed pregnancies, which was why robots, who were never hungry and who did not consume resources beyond those of their first manufacture, were so essential an economic link in the chainmail of society.
To create an artificial being has been the dream of man since the birth of science. Not merely the beginning of the modern age, when our forebears astonished the world with the first thinking machines, primitive monsters that could play chess. How far we have come. The artificial being is a reality, a perfect simulacrum, articulated in limb, articulate in speech, and not lacking in human response. And even pain memory response. How did that make you feel? Angry, shocked?
I don't understand.
What did I do to your feelings?
You did it to my hand.
Aye. There's the rub. Undress. At Cybertronics of New Jersey, the artificial being has reached its highest form. Universally adopted mecha, the basis for hundreds of models, serving the human race in all the multiplicity of daily life. That's far enough. But we have no reason to congratulate ourselves. We are rightly proud of it, but what does it amount to? Sheila, open. A sensory toy with intelligent behavioral circuits using neuron sequencing technology as old as I am. I believe that my work on mapping the impulse pathways in a single neuron can enable us to construct a mecha of a qualitatively different order. I propose that we build a robot who can love. Tell me, what is love?
Love is first widening my eyes a little bit and quickening my breathing a little and warming my skin and touching with
And so on, exactly so. Thank you, Sheila. But I wasn't referring to sensuality simulators. The word that I used was love. Love like the love of a child for its parents. I propose that we build a robot child who can love, a robot child who will genuinely love the parent or parents it imprints on with a love that will never end.
A child substitute mecha.
But a mecha with a mind, with neuronal feedback. You see, what I'm suggesting is that love will be the key by which they acquire a kind of subconscious, never before achieved, an inner world of metaphor, of intuition, of self-motivated reasoning, of dreams.
A robot that dreams.
Hey, you epic being, welcome. Andre Hodge, Infinite Potential Healing, Sermon of Truth with you once more. As I say always, thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey and investing some of your very precious peak awareness time into the concepts I offer. I do so because I feel we're all playing massive awareness catch up. You know, we're trying to find our way, what's going on and all that sort of stuff, and ideally eke out a very harmonious and joyful existence for ourselves and stuff like that. But ideally, if you're, you know, a purist and an investor in your own development and wanting to be the best you can be in this world, it's fascinating what's gone on, right? And so, you know, you can have an existence that has a certain range of success in this world, but if you really truly go within and sort of develop the, you know, the masterful nature of what we can potentially be, and I definitely aim to be an ally in helping you achieve that, then there is a lot that goes on. There is a lot that doesn't add up, and if you really sort of gain momentum and get a solid foundation and develop skill sets, or they've already always been there and stuff like that, then there's a lot that doesn't add up. And then if you get to like a real, you know, you eliminate all the basics and you do a lot of thoroughness and you eliminate you as the issue and stuff, and then you invest in people and concepts and healing modalities and all that sort of stuff, the more that you expand and gain a comprehension of what goes on, it's not just the level of awareness of what's going on, but the pushback is there as well. And it's fascinating that there seems to be variables out there that don't get that pushback. They seem to flourish in it and all this sort of stuff. And so you as an individual might be like, W2F, what the F is going on, right? Like, there should be a logic of where we improve, that things become better and life improves and stuff like that. And so, you know, I've shared my journey and it's out there and all that sort of stuff, and all the individuals I've dealt with and invested in and wanting to be allies with and support and help them flourish. And my own journey is what it is, and I've done my best, and I always operate, you can discern this as, if you want, I'm going to do a video on this at some point, but altruism is a very big part of how I operate. Like the whole win-win, like there's a very subtle difference between vested interest and altruism. You know, like a lot of people come with the foundation of what they want, and then they project it and draw people into that to help them with their shit, right? But you imagine like vested interest versus altruism is the whole spectrum of everything, right? And so if I might have my own vested interest, but altruism, there's a component here that ideally it fixes there and it helps us all and percolates through. So altruism it's another variable of very energetic efficiency, because I know like if I came with vested interest, it would be a gap and I'd be vulnerable and it'd get pushback and all that sort of stuff. So I always have a foundation of altruism in everything I do. Ideally I'm imparting stuff that will be a variable of you unpacking your pattern recognition and getting aha moments to get new levels in your conscious Tetris and stuff. And so again, if I've just released my Infinite Potential Sovereignty Declaration version 5, which is a massive release, and I really nailed it, right? And I actually, during the week, I did a session with an epic out there, shout out to you, and they actually did the full complete one with me for 4 or 5 hours, which is epic, and it was pretty profound of how I felt, because it was a very long session and stuff like that. So it's someone that's done it many times with me in the different iterations and over the last few years and stuff like that, and it was really, you know, I've always done my best and I've always expressed that the unknown is vast, and I'm humble to what I don't know, and always on the quest to accumulate awareness of what is going on out there and all this sort of stuff. So it's one of the big components that I added in that was the Internet of Bodies, and that's thanks to Sabrina Wallace, and shout out to the individual that brought that up in October 2023, because it was a huge variable, and it just was like, holy crap, right? Because what I'm going to do in this video, I'll bring it in now, just so I put it out there in front. The Influencers series is an outlet for me to offer a lot of the stuff that's going on that multidimensionally is affecting us, that I feel like there's a massive vulnerability of the lack of awareness of all this stuff, and ideally over the last couple of years you get the alignment and the strategy of what's going on and people in the community and all that sort of stuff. The incarnation war is a massive variable. The stealing of DNA codes and life force and kundalini and all this sort of stuff. What I've tried to instill is this stuff would not be needed if we were inferior, alright? So then it's like, what is our superior state and all this sort of stuff? And that's brought up, interesting experiences in sessions and missions with individuals and putting it all together to get to this point right now, alright? And so it's very poetic. I brought the Influencer series in because the last couple I've done, particularly part 7 and 8, I can't remember if I put an 8 out right now, because I'm dealing with all the variables that I want to express in this, right? But part 7 earlier on this year, and there's a big AI sort of massive investment in technology at the moment and stuff like that. So it seems like right now is a new era, and there's something being unfolded that usually what happens, we're 30 years behind and all that sort of stuff. So one of the things I've done is push so hard I feel like what's gone on with me, I felt like I've always been 5 or 10 years behind. So the hammering that went on, it was like, if I was 5 years ahead, then that wouldn't happen. And so what I've tried to do is put together the pattern, bring that forward now, so we've got the defense now. And there's all the timelines or whatever. I don't want to use timelines, but the paths that are being unfolded now. And ideally I'll just put a big adjustment bureau variable that just nails all that stuff to prevent a bad path, right? And so what I'm doing is I'm bringing stuff that's probably way too advanced for most people at the moment, but it's at least, from the multidimensional perspective, I'm investing in the data that's in your body. So when it comes time for you to get your aha moments, you've got the context that see it, and then you don't have to feel inferior, because all I'm about is the infinite potential, the superiority sort of stuff, right? So what I'm trying to do, and I've mentioned in my videos, early at the start of this year, I put it all together and I was like, holy F, do I even want to talk about this? And my GSF 38 that I released in the last video, it was interesting because I talked about a month that I had pulling back and working out a lot of the variables going on with me, and some of the big variables that I worked out, of even the concepts that I shared in that. At the moment of thought conception, of original thought of what the plan was, I was getting pushback, and I was like, holy F, you guys don't want me to talk about this, so I've got to talk about it a lot, right? Because I'm being very vague on sort of variables, but you need to listen to that of what I said, because I risked a lot, right? But getting to this, I've been trying to formulate how to talk about all this stuff, right? And my history of being an IT engineer and all this sort of stuff, and growing up before mobile phones and before the internet, and as I've shared in my story, getting into DJing and my passion for finding records, got me really going on internet searching in the early 90s, before there was any Google. There was, I think it was Alta Vista and Yahoo were the biggest search engines and stuff. And you had to be a real keyboard ninja to find stuff. There wasn't really the way to find it, and it was the passion that drove me and all this sort of stuff, right? And so that history, the components of the internet, being really an IT engineer, self-taught and working with very high level people. I remember this conversation, it would have been 2005 and 6, with a CCIE, a Cisco certified internet engineer or something like that. It's the hardest qualification to get in IT back then. And I was working with two of these guys, and they were freaking epic. And I had a joke with this Cisco guy. He was talking about wireless power sort of thing, and we were just joking about it. It's like, what the F? But it's like the Internet of Bodies sort of stuff and all that. So that was 2005-06, right? So I was working in the cold trenches with these guys on the technology and rolling it out, and seeing, you go to these like Cisco or HP, Hewlett Packard sort of events where they're talking about the future and technology, and VMware. I was very big into VMware, which is virtualized computers in very powerful computers, because the computers were getting so powerful that you could run many servers in one and stuff. And I just like the fascinating thing of my tenacity of pushing through and doing all this with all that context and experience and dealing with the people I've dealt with. It was like I was like controlled opposition for these people, where as soon as I stepped out of line to be who I am now, it was like absolutely clobbered. And you know, I've like the altruism thing, it's like I have to allow people to actually get influence and stuff. And so I know there's a lot of people that have been influenced, and it's just fascinating because you know, you as an individual, you might have a lot of people around you that get turned on you and all this sort of stuff, and it's like, why does, you might go into victimhood and, or woe is me. Like I've got this concept called woe is me-ism. Like, woe is me, oh, woe is me. You just got to get over that crap, right? You got to take all these variables as confirmation of, you know, it's a negative, but it's like, ooh, I'm getting pushback. So it's like, that's an indicator, keep going and stuff. But I just appreciate how there's like, say for me, trying to express my stuff and say be successful in the public eye and all that, and just be totally transparent and all this sort of stuff, and realize I was getting hacked and all this sort of stuff, and the coordination that was going on, and then it wouldn't, when I released version 3 of my sovereignty declaration in February last year, it was like I lost a lot of the audience and stuff like that. But it was like, I felt, this is from my perspective, right? It's like I was really nailing shit, and it was like I was nailing shit so much that it was breaking the influences. So all the people that were puppeted, they were all turned away, right? Because it was just fascinating. What I'm getting to is, this is a big thing of being influenced, right? Is there's got to be a void in you in some way, whether it's psychological or trauma or all this sort of stuff, or you have lack. Someone tells you a lie about yourself, who you were in a past life, and all this sort of stuff. There's got to be a gap or a vulnerability in us to allow that to work, right? Because I've been very transparent and all this sort of stuff, and sometimes I come out and I'm really beaten up and all that. And I did a Principles of Existence show last year where I expressed some of my influences. I was really being hammered there. But what I offered in that is my very first principle, and I established them as my codex of how I operate, right? In 2014 when I was writing my book and stuff. And the very first one is, how am I wrong in this moment, right? And there is a vulnerability of employing that, because if you give everyone else right, then you're looking at the wrong. And people that are looking to be superior, you know, they want to have the edge emotionally and egotistically and all this sort of stuff. And if you're willing to concede, then all that. But if you're willing to be wrong, you know, the unknown is vast, right? We have to trial and error and try things and see the reaction. And you realize, like society doesn't add up. Like, you would think that a lot of people would be going into this field, but they actually retreat in fear and they go into their familiar and all this sort of stuff. So all these things, it's just really fascinating. And out of it, it's just, I get very simple and I go to my truth and I keep going to the basics, and ideally I'll catch people on the other side of a lot of stuff and they'll go through their journey and all that, or the influences will be justified because, you know what I mean? It's just fascinating what goes on. Ultimately, what I've tried to do is offer the context of a consensus of what's going on, all right? And then we all, you know, the foundation is solid. I use the Dr. Weston Price analogy of many unique outcome common, if this is the menu, right, or this is the common, right, and we each have the menu, then we can see how it all fits in and stuff like that, as like a decryption of this world, of all the influences and stuff like that. So coming to all this, the poetic time of me doing this right now, right, with gathering all the information, offering the Sovereignty Declaration version 5 and the Internet of Bodies section, which took a lot to linguistically put down. Like, that's the 17 years that I've been in, right? And that's why I left that section throughout all of the versions of the Sovereignty Declaration, even the short one, because it answers so much, right? And so what I'm going to do in this video and the future ones is I'm actually going to offer a new theme, and it is a derivative of the influences, but I think it's so vast it needs to be its own theme. So just see this as a subset of the influencer series, but it's what I'm going to be doing is offering the multidimensional internet apparatus, okay? And the Sabrina Wallace has been pivotal in getting all this, and I released a clip or two of hers in that Influencers Part 7 earlier in this year, when I was talking about the invader apparatus sort of stuff, and some stuff that just blew my mind, and it makes so much sense relative to the Internet of Thoughts and Internet of Bodies and the Internet of Nanotech and all this sort of stuff, and just the sheer absence of it being discussed, let alone a concept. Like someone, to me, like Cliff High, if you're tapping into the subconscious of the collective, it's foundational to what's going on, and it's not there. It's like, why? how can that be? And all this sort of stuff. And then me, like, I offered in GSF 27, where I was tapping back into like the Project Camelot era, where it was a lot was there, like Dr. Bill Deagle and stuff like that. And and then I, you know, back 2008, 2010 to 12 and stuff, trading currencies and all this sort of stuff, and getting a lot that went on, even just now with the context of getting all this with the Internet of Bodies and stuff. I've finally had the codex to go back and look at all the things, and then all the species and all the teachings and all the, you know, I talk about in the Sovereignty Declaration 125 negative mercenary species, where a lot of the people in the community are outsourcing that, a bit like to Blackwater, where they're doing a lot of negative, so they're not getting the karma supposedly, but that's not the case anymore and all that. So getting this big monster ball, codex monster ball of decrypting everything and getting all the hindsight now and all that sort of stuff, I just see how massive this is. And around the October, November era last year, I offered the bigger patterns. I remember like people like Mark Zuckerberg and Trump on Joe Rogan and stuff, and just the coordination of the crap that was being said and stuff. And so just what I was getting to about the community and the people, like going back to 2010, 12 and stuff, it was like, it was so out there, the Project Camelot stuff. And there's a lot that I haven't shared with that, but the stuff that they're doing to people and all that is all about the Internet of Bodies and changing our DNA and hooking us up to this multidimensional internet apparatus. And it's all playing out now, and it's just fascinating, right? And then you watch series like Westworld, and I watch movies like AI and Ghost in the Shell and stuff like that, and there's a lot of things that are being seeded that it's like, no way, but it makes a lot of sense, like the making us feel in our body we're inadequate and all this sort of stuff. Like, say for women, they might have magazines over the eras, the generations and stuff, and they have a certain look of the females in there, and most women feel inadequate compared to that. So there's like this subtle eroding of us in our body to make us feel inferior, and it's sort of like a setup for augmentation and all that sort of stuff now, you know. So there's a lot it's masterful. It's just like so epic and all that. And what I was getting back to about the November, October stuff last year is that all the last 50 years of stuff, I might just show the image quick, right? I've showed this many times in those eras, but this is like the different colors, red and blue, and the different presidents and sort of stuff, and the bigger plan of what was rolling out with the chaos sort of stuff with 2020. You know, it was planned for a long time, right? And that's just a little bit relative to the body and the mechanics of stuff. But what I offered earlier in this year was about the internet, how it was like the internet structure, like the technology was the backbone for this rolling out. It's just like the setup for all that, right? It's even bigger, right? And it answers so much stuff. So this is why I'm calling this the Multidimensional Internet Apparatus, right? And it's going to be a whole series. And what I'm going to do is offer some context for getting to now, because I've got some really cool people and some lectures and stuff like that talking about the history of the last 100 years, right? And then there's a guy by the name of David Adair, and he's been on Project Camelot. And I remember Cliff was being very contemptuous towards him and stuff, but David Adair was on Art Bell, Coast to Coast AM. If you don't know what that is, it was like Art Bell would do this, I think it was from midnight to 6 in the morning or something like that in US time, but he'd have 30 million listeners and stuff. It brought all the radio stations together to be, you know, syndication and stuff like that. And he'd have Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, David Adair, a lot of Graham Hancocks and all those sort of people. One of the first things I went and hunted for being a keyboard ninja was getting a big archive of the Coast to Coast AM, and I would just listen to them all. I've got like thousands or hundreds and hundreds of the shows with all the people. Really amazing stuff, but the David Adair stuff really stood out, right? And then I went hunting for David Adair, and what he offers is how the internet was released, all right? And I was looking for the lecture. He's got one where he gives Al Gore a lot of crap, because in the 90s Al Gore went on like the Today Show and stuff and said he was the father of the internet, allowing it to be public and all that. I couldn't find that one, but I went and revisited it recently, and I've got a really good section, because it was like he offered the origin of the World Wide Web sort of stuff, and it came from military aspects as a result of the fall of the Cold War between Russia and US, all right? So then just recently, I've got all these old hard disks I basically have always downloaded everything that I watch on the internet, because I knew the internet was fluid and stuff like channels get removed and content get banned and all this sort of stuff. And one of my random searches recently was this clip on stuff called Psychotronic Warfare by Anthony Sutton. And you might not have ever heard of Anthony Sutton, but I was like, I only had part 1 of this part 2, and it was like 15 minutes, so I went on a Keyboard Ninja hunt for the whole component of it. I couldn't find it, but then I actually found this channel with the lady that's going to be in this first, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, I think her name is, and someone's just gone really hardcore and released all her lectures and stuff from the 1980s. So this first part will be about, I'll get into it, but it was like really cool because I got this clip of this Anthony Sutton, and I've got books of his and stuff, but I never really devoured him too much. And so I went on a bit of a hunt, all right? And I found that the full lecture that it's from, all right? And that psychotronic weaponry, I was always fascinated in. If you've ever listened to me, I've talked about the Open Mind Bill Jenkins download that I got from the 1980s. And it had people like Marcel Vogel, Dr. Robert Beck, and Andrea Paharic, and if you've watched the Crystal Skull stuff, the guy that's in there, Nick Nocerino. And it was just, I really have this fondness for those people that came through the pre-internet era, because they really had to be good at what they are at, right? And I had a lot of interaction with people that were in the 80s and stuff as healers when I was doing my meditation group, and a lot of people had very unique expressions of healing. Like I remember one lady, because we do hands-on healing in groups, and you can go up and get healing during the meditation and stuff. And one lady, for instance, she would only heal the ears, like her hands on the ears, but the ears, like the feet and the hands, are reflexology. Everything is in your ears, a bit like the eyes, iridology as well. And so she could tell me what was going on with my body just by putting her hands next to my ears and healing ears. So I've had a lot of this unique sort of experiences over the years on those sort of things, which are all just like mind-boggling and fascinating and stuff. But I really have a fondness for those people that came through the pre-internet, because they never really got much support. And so today, in this first part, I'm going to be introducing Anthony C. Sutton as a really amazing historian. If you're into the lectures of people like Michael Zarian and David Icke, they would talk about Carol Quigley, about the round table sort of stuff and all that. And then there's another historian by the name of David Irving, who has massively been destroyed after being, one of the best historians that's ever been, sort of thing, right? Because he questioned a lot of World War II sort of stuff, right? He went to all the documents and all that. I won't get into him too much. But Anthony C. Sutton is up there, right? And why I'm showing this image relative to him and talking about that in this multidimensional internet apparatus, what I wanted to do is offer the context for getting to the internet era, right? And this first part, I was going through this full lecture of his with this Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and it's about 2.5 hours. And I have gone through it the last couple of days and cut up parts and worked out how much I want to offer, and it's about 1 hour and 50 minutes, right? But in that 1 hour and 20 minutes is the leading up to the Cold War and what happened with history since the 1900s, and how the Bolshevik revolution happened, and the influence in society by secret societies and stuff like that, right? But the really big thing that's important that's in this, and I was thinking of offering both parts. The second part is on the psychotronic warfare sort of stuff, and that gets into the Bob Beck and Andrei Paharich stuff, and the Richard Alan Miller and Val Valerian, if you've gone through my Conscious Explorer series that I've taken down. But I've offered clips of him and stuff, and those sort of eras are from the 70s and 80s, and there was this, and even Val Valerian gets into the late 80s, 1990s sort of stuff. And this Anthony Sutton lecture or broadcast was from 1987, so it's late 80s and stuff. So it's interesting, right? Because then it gets into the David Adair stuff, where the post-fall of the Soviet Union releasing of the internet based on the military technology, all right, and GPS and all that sort of stuff. So I had this whole brewing of the internet and influences and stuff, and not sure how to offer it, and that finally working out and getting, this is why the Sabrina Wallace stuff is so important, because she shows like the massive amounts of peer-reviewed articles based on all this technology that's being rolled out. It's massive apparatus. And I was contemplating of releasing a series or a big video or something like that with like the Richard Alan Miller stuff and these guys, Bob Beck and all that sort of stuff, and Val Valerian. But then there was like 20 or 30 years of missing years, so I was going to call it the missing years. And then finally Sabrina Wallace pops up with what she's shown, and it's been on, right, releasing all these, stuff from, she's on it, like offering what happened in the missing years to be now, right? So the future releases, this is going to be part 1, and basically it's a big Anthony C. Sutton release of the context that led up to the era that he was releasing that, which is 40 years ago now, right? But that will lead into the David Adair, and then I'll get into the influences sort of stuff that are going on in the multidimensional internet apparatus, because it gets into like the now sort of thing. It's serious. It's like the robots, the altered carbon, all these billionaires, they're not wanting to die and all this sort of stuff. You know, the Musk and the Neuralink sort of stuff, and it's getting into like the technocratic era sort of stuff, right? And the massive investment in data centers and all this sort of stuff. I was watching Terminator Genesis and all this sort of stuff, and it's like there's a theme of the singularity and iRobot and all this sort of stuff. So I've got a lot of really cool clips that I've been wanting to use, and I've just held them back because the whole influencer series can expand a great deal. And then I want to get into, you know, offering some Sabrina Wallace stuff and what I offer in my Infinite Potential Sovereignty Declaration version 5. But what I'm going to do, like, that's where this image comes in, alright? And all these eras and all the staggering level of organization and stuff like that, alright? So that's what this series will be, an outlet for me to offer you the bigger structure and how sophisticated it is, how beyond everything it is. Like, I use the word inception in the document because it's like how we're being read and all this sort of stuff. It's so far beyond what most people can handle, but it's obvious once you go through and read the section that I've created, right? Let alone what I offer in all this, alright? So I'm just going to put this down. So I hope that's a pretty good intro. I've just had a little bit of a break, so I've lost my stream, but what I'm wanting to do is offer what I feel will be a very, very powerful contextual, about an hour and 20 minutes segment of this greater 2.5 hour interview lecture sort of thing in front of a public audience by this Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who I think I've heard the name before, but I've never really been able to sit through what she's offered and stuff, and I don't agree with all of her perspectives on things, but the way I feel is I appreciate her that she was on this in the 1980s, so that was 40 years ago, and I haven't heard many people even have any of the context and stuff like that. And the fascinating thing is I find it interesting. I'm not aware of her to the level of the impact she was having, and maybe you guys out there have been across her. She comes from a bit of a Christian sort of background and all that sort of stuff, and I can, with the pure soul sort of stuff that I've worked out and all that, I can feel the corruptions and stuff like that. But she's like really interesting of just to know this stuff 40 years ago, right? Like I'm playing catch up, right? So what this first one and the big variable is offering this amazing historian you probably never heard of before talk about the 20th century relative to what Russia has gone on, but it also gets into like the Skull of Bones and influence of that society percolating through the involvement through society over the 100 years, and he talks about the reference to these elites and stuff like that wanting the one world order in the early 20th century sort of stuff. So it's all been through their writings and stuff like that, and he was very much in bed with them, being a historian from their perspective, and just through his authenticity just like going against it and stuff. He's a bit of a brat, alright? It's amazing he was able to come through it and do what he was doing and stuff like that. But the big thing in the involvement of the finance and the societies and stuff like that is the shaping of history and the shaping of society more. The shaping of society itself, right? And you have to appreciate that foundation of the technocratic internet era that we're in now, right? And the really cool thing is that he talks about how the US was transferring a lot of technology to Russia for it to be the enemy that they created, sort of thing. So he gets into like the technology, like semiconductors and all that sort of stuff, like to have like the ICBM sort of stuff, like they needed specialized technology that they didn't create, and that was shared from the US sort of thing to create the adversary, right? To create the friction to justify the evolution of society and all that sort of stuff. And so he talks about a lot of the technology, which is very fascinating now, because with the Trump tariffs and stuff, there's companies like NVIDIA that's like worth 4 trillion sort of thing, that makes a lot of the chips that are in the processors that are running AIs and stuff like that. And there's this massive investment going on to do some society now sort of stuff on a big level. And on the technology transfer sort of stuff from the US to Russia, I know through listening to Jeff Rintz, and there's this guy that I've alluded to many times, his name is Sherman Skolnick. He had polio sort of stuff, and he was a lawyer, self-taught in Chicago. He died many years ago now, but he would talk about like the Clintons sharing technology with the Chinese sort of stuff. So there's always been this behind the scenes of molding society to create all this that we're in sort of thing, right? Because to me, it's always been this apparatus, the inertia of this big scale apparatus that we're in now, that has always been a fundamental, that's a justification for a lot that, you know, if you're an alternate researcher, you might go in, oh, that thing. But what I'm wanting to do is off the altruistic sort of contextual foundation of why all that has gone on. And then it gets into the multidimensional stuff, which is all the targeting and all that sort of stuff. But also offer the complete failure of the communities that I've been in, the people I've been in, that should know this, and they obviously do, all right? But they've held back the truth of this, set us all up for failure. So Richard Alan Miller talks about someone that holds back the truth as a counterintelligence sort of operative. And that's where it gets into all the species and the agendas and the alliance with the invader sort of aspects. And I would offer, like, anyone talking about the Akasha records, like the Akasha bullshit records, talking about Egypt where the Stargate to Nibiru is, talking about off-world species and stuff, to be massively discerned, all right? I've got a lot of history with the off-world sort of stuff, and I won't bring that in there, but this whole, like, poetic bringing together many concepts to be able to work this sort of stuff out, it comes from a lot of history of all these sort of things. And that's where I said this context now is let me go back and see all the shit that's gone on to me, right, the last 15, 20 years, right? So this intro is quite long, but there's those concepts that I talked about, what Anthony Sutton talks about in this, are very, very relevant to a lot that's gone on since the 1980s that he talks about. It's been a pattern that's always gone on to get us to this technological era, to roll out the Internet of Things sort of stuff that we're in, right? So I'll leave that there. This is a big intro. I hope this whole context of what I want to offer in this series, because it will go into a lot of the influences that are going on to help you get a reference point to know what's going on, to be able to sort out the ambiguity of the set up for failure by many highly aware in the community and all this sort of stuff that are actually in bed with all this stuff that have set us all up for failure, to be totally disarmed and vulnerable and stuff now. And that's where I see my threat has been a threat, because I was always going to get through. So I was anticipated for this, to prevent all this and stuff. So now that I come out the other side of it and put all this together, it's ideally we have a platform to launch to be superior and go beyond all this stuff. And that's where I had to work out the mechanics of, you know, the infinite potential sort of stuff and the sovereignty and all that now, right? So what I want to do is offer this. And as I said, it's probably a good chunk. So I'm going to break off the influencer stuff and offer that in a second section, which might be part 3, because I might offer the David Adair in the part 2 of that, what happened to the post-Soviet sort of stuff, right? Because that's where you'll hear this, and this will make it so rich to hear about the lead up to that and what happened after the fall of the Soviet Union, and then the unfolding of the internet and all that sort of stuff. So I really hope you enjoy this. I hope you discover a new teacher out there and go back and research him and find his stuff, because he seems like a phenomenally honourable, dedicated and thorough and relentless brat to the system, right? So this is the Elizabeth Clare Prophet with Anthony Sutton talking about the communism sort of stuff, and that there's a little bit that I've taken out that, you know, it would be good to share, but I'm just trying to make it condensed and stuff, all right? So I hope you get a lot from this. I'll see you on the other side, all right? Enjoy.
Historically, Americans have been called to be the keepers of the flame of liberty, and that liberty depends on innovative thinkers, the free exchange of ideas, and people with a can-do spirit.
The flame of freedom speaks, the flame of freedom within each heart, the flame of freedom, say it unto all.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet, noted author, lecturer, educator, and religious leader, interviews revolutionaries in every field who provide the missing dimension to the news that affects you. The forum you are about to see was filmed before thousands assembled at the Royal Teton Ranch in Park County, Montana. Here, in a secluded valley in the heart of the Northern Rockies, concerned citizens of the world gather each summer to attend an international conference for spiritual freedom. They commune with life, meet old friends and new, and hear the flame of freedom that speaks through Elizabeth Clare Prophet and her guests at Summit University Forum. This week, Elizabeth Clare Prophet interviews Professor Anthony Sutton, the nation's foremost authority on U.S. support of the Soviet military-industrial complex. Their topic, the capitalist-communist conspiracy.
Welcome to Summit University Forum, where the flame of freedom speaks. This evening we're speaking about the Soviet Union and the paradox and the enigma it has been since 1917. Here is a nation that cannot build a computer on its own technology and yet has a most sophisticated space program. Here is a nation that hardly can care for the basic necessities of its own people and yet has munitions far in excess of the wealthier nations. The enigma of the Soviet Union has gone back to the days of the Bolshevik Revolution. For many, it remains an enigma, but not for our guest this evening, who is Professor Anthony C. Sutton. He is the nation's foremost authority on U.S. technical support of the Soviet military-industrial complex. He is the author of a number of books which deal with the Soviet conundrum, including his 3-volume classic, Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. Professor Sutton, welcome to Summit University Forum.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here again.
Before we get into a detailed analysis of just how we built ourselves an enemy, as you put it yourself, I would like to pose the question to you of just a little bit about what the Soviet Union is doing today, and then we'll go and see how it got there. And what I'd really like to talk about now is how it all got started with the Bolsheviks in 1917. It's very important for us to understand, first of all, that capitalists and communists are not enemies. They have never been enemies. And in my opinion, they're in a conspiracy together, which I've called the International Capitalist Communist Conspiracy. And to that conspiracy theory of mine, you have provided tremendous data and documentation over the years. And you have brought that to the American people. You've told me in other interviews that no one on the left or the right has ever argued with the facts.
Oh yes, that's true. And of course I didn't know you when I was writing the books. I accidentally proved you right. Without knowing you or that you made the thesis.
Yes, definitely. I'm not implying you wrote the books
No,
deliberately
of course.
for me.
And of course this left-right this left-right thing is nonsense. Left-right is just these are like horse blinkers. You know, you put blinkers on a horse to make it look down the road. That's what left and right means, is to control people's thinking. Some you put in the left packet, some you put in the right packet. But the truth, as you just mentioned, the truth is that the capitalists and the communists are hand in hand, they're allies, they're united. From before 1917, capitalism has built up the communism for one reason or another, which we might want to get into. It is a conspiracy. I think you accepted that before I did. I denied the conspiracy for years until the weight of evidence just made me accept it. Academics are a little slow on these things.
We need people
I will agree.
like you. We need people like
what you said
to do that.
today, I will accept a capitalist, communist, international conspiracy. There is no question about it.
Well, my sense of it is that I could never understand the East-West configuration and why our government, year upon year, would make so many decisions contrary to freedom, contrary to the best interests of our people and even of our allies. And I experienced this in a profound period of pain when I was studying in Switzerland in 1956 during the Hungarian uprising. It left an indelible mark upon me to see those refugees coming into Switzerland and the Swiss students holding vigils in the streets on behalf of the Hungarians, and to think that our nation would allow the Hungarian people to be crushed.
Yes.
It changed my life,
Yes.
that experience.
We allowed them to be crushed, and the Soviets, you will remember, behaved in a typical Soviet way. They promised that they would not intervene, and then they intervened.
It was a very complex deception that they
Deception
practiced.
total. You've got the same thing in Afghanistan today, where they,
Yes.
with our State Department going along with it, where the Soviets are putting out the feelers they want to withdraw, and our State Department is saying, well, this is acceptable. Deception. And Glasnost is another deception, if we can come up to date.
Once we can agree upon a capitalist communist conspiracy, then we have to study the nature of the power elite and the super rich and the people who have the feeling that they control the planet and that we belong to them and we are used by them to their ends. And I had a very interesting speaker once who was a professor who had done a lot of research on the profiles of the power elite, who very much assisted my theory concerning the fallen angels in embodiment, which we get from the texts of Enoch. So that is one of the other components to my worldview, which I don't expect people to accept. But I do believe that there is a breed and a life wave on this planet. I believe that they have to do with a fall, a descent, such as the scriptures of East and West tell us, and that they have descended and that they have taken embodiment. Theologians throughout the ages have argued against this because they don't want to accept that there are evil angels or that they are in embodiment. But this is a type of person who has no national loyalties, who is capable of running large corporations and starting wars, using wars for effecting change and so forth. If you look through history, you can identify these figures and you can identify them today. So to me, all of that makes sense. What you have to bring us tonight, which I'm going to very much enjoy hearing you tell us about, is the entire situation beginning in October 1918 with William Lawrence Saunders, chairman of Ingersoll Rand Corporation, deputy chairman, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, who told President Wilson, "I am in sympathy with a Soviet form of government as that best suited for the Russian people." And as you know, the same year, William Boyce Thompson, another director of the Federal Reserve Bank, gave the Bolsheviks $1 million of his own money. So if we look at the actions of the leading capitalists of the time, people with names like Morgan, Rockefeller, we see a pattern of support for the Bolsheviks. Why did Wall Street support the Bolshevik Revolution?
Well, you can several possible answers. They also supported Hitler, the very same people. So they support the left, they support the right. So you go back to the Hegelian dialectic, thesis versus antithesis gives you a synthesis. If they want a synthesis of New World Order, they will get conflict. Conflict between apparent left, apparent right. There might be another reason that the capitalists want captive markets. They don't want to see the Soviet Union as another free enterprise, free society. And this is still the freest society in the world, in the United States. So they doom these countries, whether it be the Soviet Union in 1917 or Nicaragua today, they doom these countries to Marxist dictatorship so that they can be controlled from the economic and the political and financial viewpoint through what I see as the coming New World Order, the secular New World Order. So there may be a combination of reasons, and there's a deliberate creation of conflict to bring this about.
So you have just made a rather shocking statement, and that statement is that American or international capitalists, as I call them because they don't have any American loyalties, will prefer to have socialist and communist captive states so that they can have captive markets.
Yes, these people are not American. They're internationalists, and they're part of being internationalists in their private conversations. And you just gave a quotation, which I found in the State Department files, from William Sanders, chairman of Ingersoll Rand, saying he thinks that Soviet communism is the best form of government, the best form of government for the Soviet Union. When you talk to these gentlemen, there's no question that they want power. And power in the political sense equates to socialism. Whether you call it National Socialism or Bolshevik socialism doesn't really matter. When you get centralized power, centralized political control, that is what these internationalist gentlemen want. They do not believe, as I've seen them, in the American way, the Constitution of the United States. They don't believe in personal liberty for you and I. And I was talking to a gentleman today who had worked in one of these corporate structures, and he remarked how it was just like a little socialist state where people are numbered, they perform numbered actions, they're little cogs in the wheel. That is what these gentlemen want. I don't see that as the strength and the beauty of this country. That's why I've spent 20, 30 years writing against them.
Getting back to the Bolshevik Revolution, one of the ironies of it is that both Lenin and Trotsky were in exile, one in Germany, one in the United States. Tell us about who helped them get where they were going to make sure that revolution was pulled off.
Well, let me summarize about 4 chapters into 4 minutes. Trotsky was in New York. He had no income. I summed his income for the year he was in New York. It was about $600. Yet he lived in an apartment. He had a chauffeured limousine. He had a refrigerator, which was very rare in those days. He left New York and went to Canada on his way to the revolution. He had $10,000 in gold on him. He didn't earn more than $600 in New York. He was financed out of New York. There's no question about that. The British took him off the ship in Halifax, Canada. I got the Canadian archives. They knew who he was. They knew who Trotsky was. They knew he was going to start a revolution in Russia. Instructions from London came to put Trotsky back on the boat with his party and allow them to go forward. So there is no question that Woodrow Wilson, who issued the passport for Trotsky, and the New York financiers who financed Trotsky, and the British Foreign Office allowed Trotsky to perform his part in the revolution. Now over in Switzerland, you get Lenin, who was in exile. He went through Germany in the famous sealed train by permission and with the encouragement of the German General Staff. And yet Germany and Britain were supposedly fighting each other. And you get them both moving these 2 key revolutionaries into place inside Russia. And then, of course, the rest is history. They created the revolution with no more than about 10,000 revolutionaries. They needed assistance from the West, and they got assistance from Germany, from Britain, and from the United States to continue and consolidate the revolution.
Just tell us all over again why.
Why?
Just
You
tell it
won't find
again.
this in the textbooks. Why is to bring about, I suspect, a plan to control world society in which you and I won't find the freedoms to believe and think and do as we believe.
Did these power brokers actually envision at that time a one-world government that would be socialist?
Yes. The second statement I made was that they did not want the Soviet Union to develop into another free enterprise society, and that this would offset it. Aiding the revolution would offset this event. That was made as a statement in 1919. You have various books, one by Gillette, the razor blade Gillette, called The City, I think it was, which laid out this corporate socialism for the world to see as early as, what, 1905, 1910. So around the turn of the century, you begin to see actually written statements by these internationalist businessmen of the kind of socialist empire they wanted to bring about. It's there, but these books, of course, are not included in your courses in political science and history at the regular universities.
Well, talk about the Red Cross mission.
Red Cross mission to Russia, 1918.
About 17, bankers, lawyers, businessmen.
Well, yes, it had nothing to do.
Doctors.
There were two doctors, I think. There were two doctors.
What was the mission?
The mission was financed by William Boyce Thompson, the Chase Manhattan Bank, Federal Reserve System. The Red Cross didn't want to send the mission. The Red Cross said, we don't need a mission to Russia. They already had one in Romania, which was doing a good job. But William Boyce Thompson wanted this mission, and he put the money up. He financed it. And if you look, I printed a list of the people on the mission, and they were mostly bankers and lawyers, Wall Street lawyers, and people in and around the Wall Street establishment. The function or the purpose of this mission was to be in place to assist the Bolshevik Revolution. The Red Cross mission to Russia was a cover vehicle. It enabled these Wall Street elitists, these Wall Street manipulators to be there in place, and then I traced a cable, $1 million from the Morgan Company in New York to Petrograd. I forget to which bank, but it came from William Boyce Thompson, and which financed the revolution. And then they put pressure back in the State Department in Washington to actually send arms to the revolution, which went forward in 1918. And then I found in the State Department files an extraordinary telegram in which Trotsky appealed to the State Department to send American Army instructors to train the new Soviet Army. And I think I reprinted that in one of my earlier books. So briefly, the Red Cross mission was a cover vehicle to enable Wall Street to be there in place to guide and manipulate the ongoing Bolshevik Revolution.
And what was the response of the State Department?
Oh yes, they were quite willing to send U.S. Army instructors.
Do you know how, to what
I don't know if they
extent?
went forward. I know the arms, I know the rifles went forward. I didn't trace the response to the telegram, except it was approved within the State Department. And I reprinted the telegram. I never did find a response. That's probably taken out the files.
Do you know the figure to which Wall Street supported the Bolsheviks?
Well, it was $1 million.
Just the William Boyce Thompson figure?
That figure. But then you've got the other assistance. For example, the whole Siberian episode. See, in 1918, the Bolsheviks really only controlled Moscow and what was then Petrograd, which is now Leningrad. They could not have beaten off the White Russians, the Czechs, who were in Russia at that time, the Japanese, who were anti-Bolshevik. They could not have beaten it off without assistance from the United States and from Britain. And the Siberian Railroad is critical because if you look at that map of Russia, you know, Moscow and Leningrad are stuck at the left end, and you've got that vast expanse of Russia, and the backbone is the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Now, the history books will tell you that American troops went in, they occupied the Trans-Siberian Railroad in order to prevent the Japanese from coming in. Well, this is absolute nonsense. I've never written the book. I hope to get around to it one day. I've got 2 big boxes of files on this. The purpose of the American army in Siberia was to hold the Trans-Siberian Railroad until the Bolsheviks were strong enough to take it over. And they did that very effectively. They held off the Japanese. They held them back near Manchuria. They evacuated the Czechs out along the Trans-Siberian Railroad. The French and the British gave up because they said the Americans are helping the Bolsheviks. They evacuated. And in one of these books, I reprinted a little clipping from the New York Times of, I think, 1919. Finally, the Bolsheviks got to Vladivostok, right at the far end of Siberia, near Japan, in which the local commissar addressed the American army and thanked them for aiding the revolution. And that was in the New York Times, and I reprinted it. Now, this is totally contrary to everything you find in the textbooks. The textbooks say we went into Siberia to at least be neutral, and I suppose most people would assume we went in to stop the Bolsheviks. We didn't. We went in to help the Bolsheviks. There's no question about that. But as I say, that's a book I haven't written yet.
There's no question that they could not have consolidated their revolution without the capitalists.
Absolutely none. Absolutely none. They had too many enemies. Not only outside enemies, the White Russians. The Ukrainians themselves were not particularly happy. All your ethnic groups in Russia were not particularly happy with the Bolsheviks. They could not have won without Western assistance. There is no question about that.
After the revolution, the West continued to support the Bolshevik regime.
Right up to, what is the date today? July 1st, 1987.
Well,
consistently
let's take it step
and
by
heavily.
step. Let's take it step by step.
Fine.
Go ahead.
Well, the thing is, there's so much material. It's taken me 6 books just to summarize it. And now I've got to summarize it in 6 minutes. Well, all right, the Bolshevik Revolution, we aided Trotsky and Lenin to get there to start the revolution. We and the Germans. And then we held the Siberian Railroad for them. Then they were starving. The factory, they couldn't operate the factories because the Bolsheviks shot all the managers and the technicians. Either that or they left Russia. The factories were closed down. Russia was starving. By 1922, Lenin himself said the end has come. They had no food. They had these closed down plants. The plants were not destroyed in the revolution. That's what the textbooks will tell you, including Kennan, the State Department expert. He says the Russian factories were destroyed in the revolution. They were not destroyed. Why? Because I've seen the photographs after the revolution, and they're right in the Hoover Institution Tower. There are these massive boxes of photographs of Russian industry after the revolution. They could not operate the plants. So what do we do with Averell Harriman and the Chase Bank and National Bank and our old friends on Wall Street? They go in there. And of course the Hoover mission to feed Russia. We go in there and we have these 250, 300 concessions in which American companies went into Russia and they started up the idle plants. Averell Harriman took the manganese concessions, Arm & Hammer, Occidental Petroleum took the pencil factories and the asbestos plants. And all these top capitalists went in and they got Russia going on behalf of the Bolsheviks, because the Bolsheviks either shot or kicked out all the people who could run, all the Russians who could run the plants. Another point, the Tsarist industry was at a very high level. Your textbooks will tell you that Tsarist industry was backward. It wasn't until the Soviets came along that it began to make progress. This is absolute nonsense. The Russians in 1913 had 2 indigenous Russian vehicles, Russian automobiles. There has never been an indigenous Soviet automobile. They've all come from the West. The Tsarist Russians produced an airplane in 1916 with a wingspan longer than the 747. This is not known today. It's just wiped out history. Technologically, the Tsarist Russians were at least on a par with the rest of the world. They only began to decline when the Soviets took over. And then you've got the long history from that point onwards, how we got the first 5-year plan, 1929, 1933. I look at the first 5-year plan, I look at every plant that was built in Russia at that time. Every single plant was built by a Western company. Not one single plant was built by the Soviets. You name any plant, if there are any Russians here from way back, you name any plant in the first 5-year plan, and you know as well as I do who built it. wasn't the Soviets, it was a Western company. And you run down the list, Caterpillar tractor. There are more Caterpillar tractors in the Soviet Union than there are outside the Soviet Union. Ford Model A, Ford built the Gorky plant. And as soon as the Ford engineers left, they started to turn out military vehicles. You name it, in the first 5-year plan, every single plant was built basically by American companies, but a lot of British, French, and German and Japanese were in there too. Then the second 5-year plan in the 1930s was a duplicate. They tried to copy the first 5-year plan with their own resources. They fell flat on their faces, and they had to come back to the Western companies for assistance to duplicate the plants put in the first 5-year plan. And for example, I was in Douglas Aircraft Company. They let me into their files, and it was amazing the detailed assistance given by Douglas Aircraft. They bought one DC-3, and then they bought a DC-3 in sub-assembly and all kinds of duplicate spare parts to get the thing going. And then we've got that story, I don't know how much detail you want, which continues right up to today, July 1, 1987. And you mentioned, I think, this morning, the Toshiba and the Toshiba Japanese plant and the Norwegian company, a government-owned plant, which provided the milling machines which enabled now the Soviet submarines to be 10 times quieter than they were before. And that's going to cost us $4 billion so that we can offset what we have given them. And this stupidity has continued stupidity in my sense. From the viewpoint of a Wall Street capitalist, I guess it's smart business. This has continued for 60 years.
And this supposedly by our allies, but this is not the people of Japan and Norway.
No.
This is again the internationalists.
It's the internationalists. Toshiba represented on the Trilateral Commission founded by David Rockefeller in 1973. It's your top corporate elitists, your top corporate establishment attorneys, the top politicians. Senator Mansfield once said, you don't get along unless you go along. If you don't go along, you're like me, you're sitting here in Montana in the rain talking. And I'm quite happy about it. But if you go along, you've got to go all the way, like Mr. Bush. Sometimes they stumble, like Mr. Nixon, who thought he was president. He stumbled. Where did I think I went off track here somewhere.
What this brings up is the confidence with which these internationalists can usher in a world communist society.
Yes.
And that confidence must come of the belief in their own immortality, that they will be exempt from this system when it comes in, and they will continue to function the way they always have.
You know, that's a fascinating point. You know, I've gone through so many revolutions. At first I thought they didn't know. I was very quickly pointed out they did know, and for me to keep my mouth shut. And maybe we'll get into that later. I quickly found out they do know what they're doing. Then I thought they were stupid, you know, that when the revolution came, they were going to get shot, and, you know, they'd no longer be Mr. Harriman or Mr. Rockefeller, and they were going to be shot. They seem to be impervious to that way of thinking. They don't seem to be worried. I'm more concerned about their skin than they are. But that didn't make sense. So then I'm left with, perhaps they had control mechanisms. Well, perhaps they were going to use technology and debt as control mechanisms. But if they're doing that, they're not being very successful, because it seems to me the Soviets are getting a little out of hand with their global imperialism. And I think the establishment has had to rethink its position on using technology and debt as control mechanisms. But you still come back to the point, why are they continuing to do it? And frankly, I can't answer that. What I do know is that if you face them down and tell them that they're committing suicide, they become very angry. And there's a classic case I had in England before I quit the establishment. This was back in '71. I was at one of these establishment conferences in England. You got the representatives of the various bankers and the large corporations, and there's a gentleman there from Dunlop Holdings, Dunlop, the famous tire company. And I gave a paper on what we'd done to build the Soviet Union. And this gentleman, chairman of Dunlop, stands up and says, well, yes, everything Sutton says is right. There's no question. He says, I know he's right because we've been there and we've done the things he says we have done. But even if it is my own suicide, I'm going to continue to do it. Now that man said that, and I heard him right. So that's another enigma. Apparently some of these men are willing to go ahead even if it is their own suicide.
Who is going to say why? Who is going to ask them why?
Some of them get very furious when you ask them. They become even threatening. I have a copy of a letter I'm going to reprint in a later book where a lady wrote to this gentleman. The chairman of the board of Mack Trucks, the big Mack vehicles, is now out of business. The chairman of the board, I think it's Zenon, his name was, wrote back to this lady and said he will punch her in the nose if he ever meets her personally. They get quite upset when you point this out to them. But it does not explain the why. Frankly, I don't really know the why.
Maybe they know they're going down for the count and they want to just enjoy it all the way.
Very short-sighted. They're a strange breed of cat. I frankly, I'll say one thing, whether they're internationalists, whether they're Japanese, British, or American, or German, they all think the same way. They're internationalists. That's about all I can say about them.
Well, what does Stalin have to say about how we built his nation for him?
Well, Stalin, in 1944, told Harriman, Averell Harriman, who was then U.S. ambassador to Russia, that, he told the truth, for once. He said that 2/3 of Russian plants have been built by, I think he said, American or Western technical assistants. And the other third, he omitted to say the other third were copies of the 2/3. But basically, Stalin was telling the truth. But Averell Harriman reported this back to the State Department, but it didn't seem to worry him very much. He was still in the forefront of transfers long after World War II.
What is the level of admission of all of this leadership from the Bolshevik Revolution to the present, their admission that communism does not work and socialism does not even work?
Within the Soviet Union or outside?
Either place.
Within the Soviet Union, every so often you get what's happening today, the admission. Gorbachev is admitting it doesn't, everybody knows it doesn't work. Everybody knows it. The Russians know it, I know it. Maybe your liberal media, the Washington Post is a little behind with its investigative journalism. But a socialist system does not work. It just plain doesn't work. Every so often they go through the rituals. Stalin went through it. Lenin first faced it in 1922. Stalin went through it. Khrushchev went through it. They all go through this process. They admit it doesn't work, and then they offer the bait, big contracts, and you get more Western assistance, more subsidies, more loans. We go in and we bail them out and we make it work. Socialism will not work unless there's a free enterprise system on the outside which enables it to work. And you get the same in Nazi Germany, National Socialism, socialism again. If you go back to the 1933, 1934 period, you'll find General Motors, you'll find General Electric, you'll find these big corporations pushing the latest in American technology into Nazi Germany. In fact, if it wasn't for the Standard Oil hydrogenation patents, which were transferred between 27 and 34, Germany could not have gone to war in 1939 because Germany has no natural oil resources. It has to convert coal, and Standard Oil had developed a process to do this. So socialism plain does not work. It's a free enterprise system that works.
This admission, and therefore the changing of the system, means that this entire power elite no longer is in leadership. So they can't admit it, so they just keep going as long as Western banks and capitalists will prop them up.
Yes, yes, and they play them beautifully. It was whining and dining in the old days, but now they've got, I think, more sophisticated methods which we may get into. I can't prove they're using it, but it sure looks like it. They flatter these businessmen. They're allowed to take their corporate jets into Moscow airport. They give them palatial apartments, which no Russian has ever seen. They know how to play them. They play them like violins, and they get what they want. Quite who controls who, I don't know. I'm not going to totally believe, as many people argue, that Wall Street controls Moscow. The Russians are much too smart a people for that. There could be another form of control in process too.
They are too smart.
Yes.
They just let people think that they think that they're controlling them.
Yes.
Well, you say in national suicide, 100,000 men died in Vietnam and Korea by U.S. technical assistance, Western assistance. Why don't you tell us how we brought this about?
Well, we brought it about by making the rather ridiculous mistake of thinking you can separate civilian industry from military industry. We had these so-called export control acts. We were allowing these plants to go forward to the Soviet Union, and we told the American people and the other people around the world and the free world that these were civilian plants. They had no military application. This was absolute nonsense. Any single plant in the world has some military application. The Russians knew what it was, and they immediately converted it. Immediately. Now, I knew this, and this is a little aside, indirect answer to what you're saying, but it brings out some other points we touched on earlier. I'd finished the 3 volumes. I catalogued the transfers by 1970, the middle of the Vietnamese War. I catalogued the transfers in 3 volumes from 1917 up to about 1966. Plant by plant, technology by technology. I identified each technology, each plant in use in the Soviet Union. I traced the source of that back to its Western origin. Then Stanford, Hoover Institution, was holding volume 3 in galley proofs, and they held them in galley proofs for 18 months, which is not a very efficient way of doing business, because you want to recoup some of your investment by selling the book. Normally, when you get to galley proof, you push that book out quickly to start selling the book. I got a little suspicious, and then I thought, well, there's a military application here, and I've been asked to keep out of the 3 volumes any implication that we might have assisted the Soviets militarily. Well, at that time, I was perhaps a little naive, and I didn't have to take out too much, because actually I'd not looked at the military implications at that point. But I got a little suspicious why they were holding volume 3 in galley proof, so I started to look at the military implications. I wrote National Suicide without telling the Hoover Institution. And because of what was going on in Vietnam, we had men being killed there, and they were being killed with our trucks, with our technology, and it was still going forward. For example, the Gleason plant was sending machine tools into the Gleason works in New York, was sending machine tools into the Gorky plant in Moscow in the middle of the Vietnamese War. Those trucks, those armored cars were turning up on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So I knew this, and I was getting a little mad about it, so I wrote National Suicide, and then Hoover tried to suppress publication of that. They didn't succeed. When you get to the military implications of the transfers, you find that the establishment becomes very, very sensitive and doesn't want this discussed.
What did Stanford say about national suicide?
Well, this goes back a little bit to the Republican Convention in 1972, where I'd given a blistering speech. It was morally wrong to support the enemy. We had men being killed in Vietnam, and we were helping the other side kill them. I said, this is morally wrong. And I remember those senators and congressmen sitting up there with blank faces. Nobody wanted to hear. They took the cameras out. All the copies of the speech went out of the press room. That was a complete censorship job, and that alerted me to what was going on, so I got...
How did you get to speak to the Republican convention in the first place?
Well, that was innocence on their part. I guess I must look rather mild and reserved to many people. That was a mistake they made. That was a tactical error on their part to get me there. They never repeated it. So then I could see the way the winds were blowing, and I wrote National Suicide. I didn't tell Hoover Institution I was writing it. They tried to suppress it. The publisher wouldn't back off. I wouldn't back off. I had a contract, so they couldn't fire me. Not right then. They did later. I guess I just like swimming. I'm not like a salmon, I guess. I want to swim uphill all the time against the current. But the establishment is very hostile to any was up to very recently any discussion of the military implication of technological transfers. But what you said this morning marks a change in the attitude, because the New York Times had a long article on that Toshiba case, and this was the military implications of technological transfers, which it would not have done 10 or 15 years ago. So very gradually, I think you may be seeing a sign of change in the establishment, but it has not gone far enough by any means.
Do you want to tell us about Stanford?
Well, Stanford was very pleasant. I was paid to write books, do nothing else. And when I came back from Miami Beach and I made this blistering speech, I thought, well, at least I've done something beneficial. Instead, the director asked to see me and said, Tony, if you make one more speech like that, you won't survive. So I was a little bewildered. I said, well, what have I done? I've just told them the truth. And I said, well, Tony, you don't say things like that. Then when National Suicide came out, I was smart enough not, I learned a little bit. I didn't tell them I was bringing the book out. It was a trade book. And again, I got hauled up into the director's office, and first they argued it was plagiarism. I copied my 3 volumes, so I gave a very innocent answer: how can an author plagiarize his own work? And that kind of stopped them cold. Then they said, well, anyway, that I couldn't write it because I was employed by the Hoover Institution. And I said, well, there's nothing in my contract which says I can't write this book. Then they dropped me at that point. They went back to the publisher. The publisher wanted to publish the book. He went ahead, and that was Arlington House. And then in the end, they gave up on me. I got hauled upstairs again, and they wanted me to write, if I remember, a 3-volume biography of Herbert Hoover, which would keep me occupied for maybe 5 years and out of mischief. I declined that. And then they tried the bluffing routine. They said, well, you're no longer a fellow of the Hoover Institution. And then the next morning, my name and my secretary's name were removed from the personnel rolls. But what they didn't know is I had a contract. So I just produced the contract and Xeroxed it. I wasn't that stupid to give them the original. And then by that time I just had enough of this nonsense, and I left voluntarily about 2 years later and became completely independent. And that's about the time which I think you ran me down. And not literally, but if I could summarize, I think I'm a little stubborn in the search for the truth. I can't say that I've got the whole story in these books, but at least I've got a lot of the story which is not included in what you might call your regular textbooks.
Tell us about today. What is the technology from the West that's most identifiable, easily identifiable in the Soviet weapons systems?
Oh yeah, semiconductors. Oh, without question, semiconductors, because you know, today electronics is part of everything. Microphones, television, everything we do. Same with military weapons systems. In, let me see, in the mid-1970s, and I've detailed this in The Best Enemy Money Can Buy, the Soviets could only make semiconductors on a laboratory scale. The reason is the manufacturing process is so precise, so sophisticated. You have to maintain very precise quality control. They could only make batches of semiconductors. But batches of semiconductors out of the laboratory is no good if you're making thousands and thousands of tanks and aircraft. They had to have a semiconductor plant. They didn't even know what to order. The first step was Control Data Corporation set up a technical assistance agreement. Control Data told them what they needed to order in the United States to set up a plant to manufacture semiconductors. Then the Bruchhausen network, which was an illegal network, went about acquiring these individual machines, the ovens and the various calibration equipment, very precise equipment for the manufacturing of these extremely well, this is the core of all modern technology, these little semiconductors. The Bruchhausen network was, as a matter of fact, Bruchhausen has just been arrested in Germany. He was allowed to operate for 20 years.
Just recently.
Very recently. The Bukhausen network, which was an illegal network, acquired the equipment for the Soviets, and then one by one they acquired the various pieces of equipment that were needed, illegally mostly, and then assembled the semiconductor plant in the Soviet Union. That is the key. Without semiconductors, they'd still be back with the old, you remember the old tubes, radio tubes? The same as Pravda in 1929 said that without Ford Motor Company, they'd stay in the age of the horse and the cart. And they would be. So we brought them into the 20th century, and now we've just pushed them into the 21st century.
What about the whole affair of the grinding machines, the ball bearings?
The Bryant Chucking Grinder
Chucking
case.
Grinder Company, MIRVing their missiles.
Yes, multiple re-entry vehicles. You've got a choice. You can either put one warhead on a rocket, or you can have multiple re-entry, independently targeted warheads, maybe 8 or 10 of them. The Soviets couldn't do that because they couldn't make the extremely precise ball bearings that you need for the guidance systems for these independently targeted warheads. The tolerances, you're talking something like 1/1,000,000th of an inch tolerance in these little ball bearings. We know that 98% of these ball bearings produced in the United States go for military end users. There's just no civilian use at all for these things. Made by one company, the Bryant Chucking Grinder Company. In the early 1960s, the Soviets wanted to buy some. Chucking Grinder Company was turned down by Commerce at that time. Then along came, yes, it was first the Johnson administration, then the Nixon administration. And under the Nixon administration, the Soviets were allowed to buy, I think, 64 of these machines, which was 1/3 more than we had in the United States. The only end use is to MIRV missiles. And Kissinger knew these had a military end use. We allowed them to go forward.
Kissinger what?
He knew they had a military end use. He knew the only end use of these machines, the Central Line B machine, was to make these little ball bearings which MIRV the missiles.
Did he ever give answer to this decision?
He allowed it to go forward. On another case, the Karma River truck plant, he admitted that it had military end use. I've never seen his admission on the Chucking Grinder case, although Commerce and State by that time were arguing that it was peaceful end uses. It had been so infiltrated by these people. So they knew it had military end use. It's deliberate. Comes back to the first thing you said about conspiracy.
I'd like to hear an alternative theory as to why this continues to happen. I haven't found a better theory.
I struggled for 20 years denying there was a conspiracy. On television, on radio, between audiences, I said, no, there's no conspiracy. But like I said, academics are a little slow. I can't find any other explanation. If you go through the files, you go back, say, to 1918, I mentioned Trotsky asked for U.S. Army men to train the Red Army. You see this time and time again. It doesn't appear in the newspapers. The politicians won't talk about it. The administrations won't admit it. There's got to be a conspiracy of silence. There's got to be.
I'm not saying that everyone that is a party to this is conscious of the overall scheme or of where what they're doing is leading in the end. But I think people are one at subconscious levels.
Yes. I would say very few are aware of it. And most bureaucrats just follow orders. It comes back to the earlier quote I gave from Senator Mansfield, if you want to get along, you've got to go along. Most people, unfortunately, want to get along, so they go along. They don't ask the right questions, or the wrong questions. They don't ask embarrassing questions. This applies to politicians, to bureaucrats, to academics. Academics may be the worst of the bunch. You know, they want the little consulting jobs and that kind of thing. They don't ask embarrassing questions. There's no money, there's no percentage, there's no profit in asking embarrassing questions about transfers of technology. You can make more money by going along. It's a sad commentary, but I have to be honest about it.
Under the heading of strategic trade, the 1984 Republican Party platform reads, "By encouraging commerce in militarily significant technology, the Carter-Mondale administration actually improved Soviet military power. Because of that terrible error, we are now exposed to significant risk and must spend billions of defense dollars that would otherwise have been unnecessary. The Reagan administration halted the Carter-Mondale folly." End of quote. Who wrote it? Expose this statement of the platform.
Well, I don't know who wrote it, but it's nonsensical.
It's absolutely nonsensical.
I mean, Reagan has done more than anybody else to build up the Soviet
So tell us about what Reagan's been doing and why has he been doing it?
Well, just the loan example we were talking about, I mentioned just earlier. You've got this operation called USTEC. Here we've got a completely new area to open up. USTEC, United States Trade and Economic Commission, founded in 1972 by George Shultz, who was then Secretary of the Treasury. Carter let it fall into default. In the Reagan administration, Shultz is brought back Secretary of State. 1983, he revives USTEC. USTEC in New York and in Moscow, beautiful offices. 8 full-time Russian engineers in New York sorting over U.S. technology with the aid of American corporations to decide what they want to transfer back. One of the first things that Mr. Shultz did was to have the FBI remove the agent, because the FBI, being interested in security, infiltrated one of their agents into the New York office of USTEC. Shultz told the FBI, take the man out, and so it's been an unmonitored situation since 1972. The FBI has not been monitoring it because Shultz, same situation with the Moscow embassy, where Shultz, I think, made the statement, if I can paraphrase him, that it's a provocation to conduct counterintelligence operations. In other words, to defend yourself against Soviet manipulation, against Soviet bugging is provocation, this kind of stupidity. So the Reagan administration, through the vehicle of USTEC, the U.S. Soviet Union Trade and Economic Commission, has actually increased the flow of technology to the Soviet Union. We have right now 35 technical assistance agreements between U.S. corporations and the Soviet Union. In computers, all the way from computers to obviously in truck building, in many agricultural areas, you name it, we're doing it today. We're back where we were in the 1930s because Soviet industry has got to be brought up to higher technical levels. They cannot do it without Western assistance, and this is still primarily the United States. So I see no difference between Herbert Hoover and Reagan. And here you get these so-called conservative presidents have been actually the most active in allowing these transfers or establishing the vehicles for these transfers to go forward. It was Herbert Hoover that allowed the first 5-year plan to go forward. It's Ronald Reagan that allowed USTEC to act as the vehicle for coming transfers.
In your book, The Best Enemy Money Can Buy, you say that the Reagan administration has a list of 150 Soviet weapon systems using American technology. What are some of the most important of these?
I mentioned look-down radar. It's a terrain radar, so you can follow the terrain more easily without crashing into the ground. You mentioned this morning milling machines for these gigantic propellers. The Soviets have titanium bodied submarines, which we don't have. Much of the technology for fabrication of this titanium came from the United States. I'm just jumping around different examples. The Soyuz docking system, where these two satellites come together in space and dock. The docking mechanism, the locking mechanism, is American.
Is what?
Is U.S.
U.S.
It's a U.S. docking system. Now, they could explain that on the basis of ever the United States and Russia link up in space, they have to have a common docking mechanism, I presume. There's a little weak argument given the whole history of these transfers. Let me see. basically anything to do with advanced engines, developments in internal combustion engines, anything to do with electronics, fundamentally, has come from the West.
Computer and semiconductor.
But we're beginning to see a pattern which I've not seen before. And that is that the Russians are very capable people, very intelligent. They don't think the same way we do. They're saddled with this ridiculous system which we keep in operation. From the military viewpoint, I think the Russians are now beginning to use their ingenuity to take our technology and use it against us in weapon systems which are beyond the imagination of our own planners. And this, you get to the suicide phase, how we assist the Soviets. They will take this technology, they can restructure it into different forms, into different weapon systems, which we either don't have the imagination to conceive, or that for political or corporate reasons we don't want to bring into production.
That is clearly where it's going right now.
I think so. I think so.
You know, Japan took wartime technologies, developed them for consumer products, and beat us out of the industries, whether it's automobile, Sony.
Yes. A good example is Nazi Germany in World War II. Now, Germany is a relatively small country with no natural oil, very few natural resources. We've given them we transferred the technology in the early 30s. And yet, technologically, I think the Wehrmacht, the German army, was way ahead of the US and certainly the British army and certainly the Russian army. You can take individual weapon systems. Let me see, if you take, say, these little short weapons, the infantry weapons that aimed at tanks. The US weapon was the bazooka, the British was the Piat, and then the Germans produced the Panzerfaust, I think it was called. The Panzerfaust was well ahead of both the US bazooka and the British Piat gun for these projectiles. So you can take technology, and I think Nazi Germany proved it, and turn it on its originator in a military way. In other words, we have a precedent for what is happening now with the Soviet Union.
Well, they have a greater taste for war, conquest, than our establishment has been able to focus on. So they have a reason to put hundreds of thousands of researchers into this.
Yes, but I'm afraid it's more deadly than that. They have a greater taste for war. They talk about fighting for peace, you know, which is ridiculous, really. How can you fight for peace? Unless you think of it in Marxist terms. But they're more deceptive in their thinking. Americans, I think most Westerners tend to be straightforward. The Russians have the ability to, what I call double think. They can think in contradictory terms at the same time. And this, like Glasnost, for the sixth time, they're going to deceive us. You know, Glasnost's openness, and there's no openness. They've let out, what, 100 prisoners from the Gulag, and there's another 1 million back there. But the Washington Post, God bless, in its innocence, sees these 100, Zakharov and the others, and made these photographs, so we get the deception of Glasnost. We don't think in terms of deception, certainly not in military terms, whereas the Russians automatically think of deception as an art, as a military form.
How much is their strategic defense program dependent on the United States?
Well, I just mentioned the semiconductor plant. You could not have strategic defense without semiconductors, not in the slightest. So I'd say...
would you say it's totally dependent?
Totally, yes, because what was the saying for the want of a battle?
The shoe.
The shoe, without the nail, you couldn't put the shoe on the horse to win the battle. The semiconductor is the nail. Without that nail, you can't put the shoe on the horse. Without the semiconductor, you can't have strategic defense. Totally.
Well, let me show you a video clip, and I'd like to ask you to comment on it, of transfer of submarine technology to the USSR, the one by Toshiba and by the Kongsberg Company of Norway. Let's just look at this a minute.
As the port city of Stavanger prepared to welcome NATO's defense ministers, Secretary Weinberger tried to determine what to do about the Kongsberg Company, one of Norway's largest defense contractors, and the Toshiba Company of Japan. 4 years ago, they arranged for the illegal transfer to the Soviet Union of high-tech machine tools used to make submarine propellers work more quietly, thus avoiding detection. By misrepresenting the final destination, Kongsberg was able to ship computers to Japan, where Toshiba attached them to milling machines, which were then sent to the Soviet shipyards at Leningrad. Suddenly, U.S. anti-submarine forces noticed their listening devices were having trouble finding Soviet subs. In time of war, this could permit the Russians to play havoc with U.S. efforts to resupply allies like Norway and Japan.
This is a severe loss that requires remedial action, and without that remedial action would give the Soviet an advantage they couldn't otherwise have obtained for themselves.
To penalize the two companies, the Pentagon first threatened to block their exports to the United States. But then Norway and Japan began criminal investigations of their own, and the Pentagon now appears ready to back down most of the way. To keep U.S. markets open to Kongsberg and Toshiba, Pentagon sources say Norway and Japan may be required to contribute either money or technology to a major U.S. effort to reestablish anti-submarine warfare supremacy.
Can I make a comment?
Please.
I think you would not have seen this 15 years ago. So this is a slight change in a sane direction. You've got the Secretary of Defense complaining about a transfer of technology. They're getting worried, and for good reason. For good reason. But it's a little late in the day.
Where is it all going to lead?
That's difficult to say because of several factors which you can't see very clearly. I don't know how far this trend of Caspar Weinberger is going to continue. For example, Schultz is still arguing for transfers. Corporate America, like corporations around the world, Toshiba included, are still going to press for transfers. So, although we see a slight change in direction, I think the main direction transfers are going to continue. Inevitably, at some point, there's going to be a global shift of power. We shall then become increasingly under Soviet dominance. You can see that in Europe. You can see the Soviets penetrating into the Indian Ocean, into Central America, into Africa. They're feeling very sure of themselves. That's one thing. Secondly, you've got a whole new area of weapons systems, which I suspect are being used, in fact I know are being used. We apparently, officially, don't even know they're being used on us. This whole area of psychotronic warfare, we know it's being used. But when you look at, say, the reactions of State Department, they act as if it is not being used. So, when I say that that was a hopeful sign that you just saw, Weinberger commenting on Toshiba, that is so small compared with what is needed that it's not going to turn the tide. What do I see ahead? I see a showdown coming with the West and the Soviet Union, maybe around the year 2000, 2010.
What kind of a showdown?
Bluff. They'll be preceded by psychotronic warfare. They will behavioral modification of our leaders. The Soviet Union actually is a very weak country. I mean, we could, I suppose, if we wanted to, neutralize it. I could see a gigantic bluff in which the U.S. is told to surrender, or it'll be atom bombed. And I think with behavioral modification, that they could well twist a surrender out of a compliant administration in Washington. After all, you've got, who was it, Hart, I've forgotten his first name.
Gary Hart. Gary Hart.
Yeah, I think we owe the lady a thank you. Because I would dread to think of a man like Gary Hart in the White House and being faced by a Soviet threat. The man would collapse like that. Politicians are weak by nature, they're compromisers. And the Soviets know that. And you get a combination of the political makeup plus psychotronic warfare. I can see a bluff being pulled off in 10, 20 years.
As far as the order is concerned, many people here have read everything you've written about the order, and as a result of that have an even better understanding of how the power elite has worked to produce crisis for change, etc. You want to tell us a little about your research at Yale?
The order, that came about in a very interesting way. As I freely admitted guilt, I said there was no conspiracy for 20 years. I must have said it before millions of people. And then one day, and this is exactly how it happened, I got a package in the mail anonymously. And I opened it, and it was a membership list of the Skull and Bones, which is a totally secret organization, Skull and Bones at Yale University. And I kind of looked through it, and I thought, well, you know, I can't do much with this, and I put it on one side, and I regret to say it sat in a storage box for 2 years. And then one day, out of curiosity, I pulled it out, and I ran my eye down the names of the members, those who had been members of Skull and Bones. And then it began to hit me, this was the establishment. I was getting names like Harriman, Stimson, Bundy, Bush, Aldrich, all the top names in the establishment. Not all of them, but enough to make me extremely curious. So I looked a little more at the package that was sent to me, and this is roughly what I found, that Skull and Bones was founded in 1833 at Yale University, only at Yale University. It's a chapter of a German secret society, which is not identified. There were some photographs of the members, and particularly that they divided into clubs. Each year, 15 Yale men in their senior year, this is an all-male organization, in their senior year, 15 men are selected by the previous club. So it is a self-perpetuating organization. They seem to be selected on the basis of athletic ability, but particularly their willingness to go along with to make a team effort to play the game. Because in the package I got were some notes on who might be selected for the following year, and these little handwritten notes gave the attributes of various people, and I was able to infer what they were looking for. So you've got this secret society, which 1833, a new club each year, and each club has a designation like D182, D183. I had the complete membership list. They were even kind enough to enclose the various invitations to the meetings they hold secretly each Thursday evening, apparently, with the Skull and Bones prominently displayed on the announcement form. And I was able, they also gave me lists going back to 1833, and I was able to find they're using the same Skull and Bones in the mid-1800s as they are today, the same imprint. Then later I got an update, so actually what I have is a membership list from 1833 up to today, all members of Skull and Bones. Completely secret society. It is so secret that if you're a member of Skull and Bones, you may not remain in the room while it is under discussion. You have to walk out. This was tested for me by a newspaper reporter who cornered George McBundy. The Bundy family is prominent in the order. He cornered Bundy at a meeting down in Irvine, California, and started to discuss Skull and Bones, and of course Bundy walked away. They tested it on William Buckley, who's also a member. William Buckley called me a name which I won't repeat here, apparently for doing what comes naturally to me. This has been tested, and they will not discuss Skull and Bones in front of other people who are not members. It is totally a secret society. And then I found out that Yale had two other secret societies, Squall and Key and Wolf's Head. They're kind of weak sisters of Skull and Bones. I've also got their membership lists. I also got some internal letters between members, and between themselves they talk about our order. It's almost like the mafia, our thing, Cosa Nostra, our thing. I took some key names, names like Stimson and Bundy and Bush, and I traced the political actions of these people. And by tracing their political actions through even establishment history, you could identify certain clear concepts. One is that they have backed both sides of a number of wars. They backed Nazi Germany. They backed Soviet Russia. We talked earlier this evening about the build-up of the Soviet Union. Okay, the attorney who submitted a memorandum to Woodrow Wilson recommending the recognition of the Soviet Union and assistance to the Bolshevik Russia was none other than William Thatcher. Thatcher is a member of the Order, Skull and Bones. You don't find their members in large numbers. What you find, all key organizations have a key member in place. Whether it be the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, the Atlantic Association.
What about the National Security Council?
Oh, yes.
Can you name the person?
I can name CIA. Van Dyne was in CIA. William Buckley. Another interesting thing, I can't remember offhand to answer your question. I answered it with CIA. Know that we're talking about left and right. And I find that William Buckley, conservative in quotes, is a member. But so is the Reverend Sloane Coffin, who's way on the left because he organized the anti-Vietnamese War resistance. In fact, it was William Buckley's club that selected William Sloane Coffin in the next club. So here we establish the phony right and the phony left. You find the representatives on the right, the representatives on the left. Now, there used to be a Marxist journal, I think the Monthly Review, that was founded by the Order.
A Marxist journal?
Marxist journal. It's a very important Marxist journal because it is the link between the old Marxists of the 1930s and the new progressives which came up in the 50s and the 60s. The Monthly Review was actually founded by Matheson, who's a member of Skull and Bones. They financed it. That's on the left. On the right, Time, Life, Fortune. That massive complex was founded and financed by 22 members of Skull and Bones.
That's a lot of members.
Well, they need a lot of money.
22 of them.
Need a lot of money. It's cheaper to finance a Marxist journal than a Time Life and Time Life Fortune. What you find is the key people or members in key places, and the influence is felt. Then another thing I found, so all right, they operate this phony left-right, they create wars, there's no question about that. I find continuity. A good example is the Bundy family. William Bundy, if I can recall, was Secretary of War under Roosevelt in World War II. At the end of World War II, he pulls in his two sons, William Bundy and McGeorge Bundy. They, in turn, under Kennedy and Johnson, become National Security Advisor to the President and, I think, Assistant Secretary of Defense. So you find continuity within families. The Simpson family the same way. The Bush family. This is how they perpetuate their political control. So basically what you've got is secret societies within the Ivy League universities, because the equivalents exist at Princeton and Harvard. Within the Ivy League universities, they control power, they are self-perpetuating, therefore their deficiencies, their ideas, and their weaknesses are also self-perpetuating, as I see it. This, I think, explains why so many things about our foreign policy go wrong. That, very briefly, is the Order.
Well, the Order on education was extremely helpful.
And that I had to write very quickly because I'm not an authority on education, but the pattern came out very clearly through Golladay and going back to Germany, the German educational philosophy of the 19th century.
So, how do you see the Order in USTech?
Well, again, the Order has its men in USTech. They're in place. Averell Harriman, for example, was a member of Skull and Bones. Brown Brothers Harriman, I think out of 16 partners in Brown Brothers Harriman, 10 are members of Skull and Bones. Brown Brothers Harriman is a very important member of USTEC. It's the driving force behind it. That's the investment bankers in New York. So yeah, you'll find a lot of people in USTEC are not members of Ivy League universities. But the basic drive behind it comes from these old-line elitist establishment people. There's that bridge. You have a little more difficulty with the Trilateral Commission because that was founded by David Rockefeller, and traditionally the Rockefellers have gone to Harvard, not Yale. So we'll have to put that on hold till I get out the Porcelain Club, which is the Harvard secret society, and then the Rockefellers turn up on the membership list there. But I haven't done the analysis yet.
Have you turned up anything comparable in the Soviet system?
No. The Communist Party would be the closest. They have nothing comparable in their educational system. If you want to get ahead, of course, the way to do it is join the Communist Party and work your way up through the ranks and become a Gorbachev or Andropov. That's still the way to do it in the Soviet Union.
And the long-term goal is control.
Control.
Very paranoid are these people about being in control. That's the whole outcome of this study.
Yeah, now this is something I don't understand. This desperate search for power. And I'm not a very good person to understand this, because if there's one thing I do not want in this world is power. I have enough trouble running my own life without running anybody else's life. But these people seem to have this desperate need. It's almost a psychotic hunger to control other people, manipulate other people. And this I don't understand, but it's more than money, it's more than greed. It's the psychotic search for power.
That's right.
Behind it.
And it seemed to me because they have no inner power, no inner resource. And so they get their power by controlling people, and the people really have the power, and they know who has the power, and if they don't control them, they'll cease to be in operation. They just won't be who they are anymore.
So they are empty people inside.
They're totally empty. They have nothing inside, and that's why they're desperate. And we don't have that need. We don't sense the need for power because we feel the power of God, and it's sufficient to us.
I hadn't thought of that. I told you I was a little slow.
Well, how about the order in the attack on SDI?
Oh dear, I am slow this evening. I've not yet identified a direct link. Now, Vice President Bush is a member of the order. And Vice President Bush, of course, is one of the few Republicans who's been ambivalent on SDI. If normally you look at Dole, your top-ranked Republicans have come out for SDI. Bush's statement was ambivalent. He said, under certain circumstances, I would be for it, under certain, I would not, without defining what circumstances. So the only member of the order who's had anything to do with SDI has been ambivalent. In other words, leaving the way open to say no.
Well, maybe the certain circumstances have to do with who is calling the shots from the order, which brings me to the question, is this a consensus that is reached, or is someone behind the scenes giving out these directions?
I think the center, while Averell Harriman was alive, was in Brown Brothers Harriman, the investment bankers. 16 partners, 11 or 12 were partners of these partners, were members of Skull and Bones. That was the center. The center appears to have shifted now more towards perhaps the Bush family, the Mellon families, that group of families which go back into Texas oil, although people don't know this about Bush. It appears to have shifted into that area. But I'm a little out of touch with my sources. They only show up every so often. They send me another batch of material. I've not had any contact for about 18 months now.
These anonymous packages?
Oh yeah, they keep sending the anonymous packages. I've not had anything for 18 months now.
That's for real, anonymous packages.
Yeah, they are anonymous packages, yes. Yeah, yes. That is for real.
Somebody on the inside wants you to know.
Yes. I better not give my suspicions.
Okay.
When I began to publish it, they ran some tests on me. I got a letter from a gentleman who claimed he was a member. He was writing under a code name, and he said he had more information to give me. He wanted the defect or something. I forget the exact word. So I wrote back through, not through any of my addresses, and said I wanted to meet him and asked him certain questions. And he said that I would be hearing from 2 other members, and indeed I did hear from 2 other members, but they made a mistake. They gave me false names, but they didn't give me false addresses. So I had one of my assistants go through the membership list and look for these 3 addresses. And she came up with the 3 like that. So I got their correct names. So I wrote back and I said, well, if you were on the level, you wouldn't be giving me a false name. And that just cut the communication like that. So it does exist. It is a secret society. They're not very happy with me.
And that doesn't concern you too much?
Oh, not in the slightest. I'm happy they're not happy with me.
What I'd like to do is to get on with a subject that you've been most involved in since you've done all these things that we've been discussing, and that is psychotronics. I'd like to show you a video.
Hey, welcome if you made it to this far. So that was a big chunk of this really awesome sort of sit-down interview lecture by Anthony C. Sutton, hosted by Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Maybe 2 people that you've never heard before and stuff, but like I said at the start, that was done in 1987, alright? So how on it were they compared to what you know now and stuff? Maybe there's a lot of stuff that you never heard before. And the reason for me offering that in this part 1 of the multidimensional internet apparatus was, to me it would be a very solid foundation for what I offer in the future. It was like the context for society brewing over the 100 years or 80 years to get to the 1980s, and then the what I offered about the fall of the Soviet Union and a lot of the technology transfer sort of stuff that went on, because David Adair, he was very much into NASA and stuff, and taking the technology that was invented in NASA to percolate that through to society and stuff like that. But one of the big variables was the satellite network that became the World Wide Web and GPS sort of stuff, right? And I was, back in the early 90s, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was very good at computer-aided drawing and mathematics, and I got into surveying, which is measuring the ground, right? And that very early on era was using the very early stages of the GPS and satellite navigation and stuff like that. So I was out in the field measuring ground and stuff like that. We went on a hike and measured in a national park, for instance. We took a big backpack with batteries and stuff with a satellite tech that measured where infestations of prickly pear were in this national forest, national park sort of thing, and I had a lot of field work with this stuff, so I was involved with it. But the reason why I'm offering this in a totally separate theme of just how big this apparatus plan has been, and then it gets into the COVID stuff, which was for 50 years, and then in the 90s, like people like Bill Gates and stuff, and just the sheer, like how we have to up level our thinking and our perception of how this all works. And we might feel like everything is an accident and stuff. It's just such a masterful rollout of things over vast spans of time, with massive sort of implications on society and stuff like that. It's just, it takes a whole next level of thinking to appreciate all this, and just how what might be in the public or the spiritual or, you know, the alternate community. Is just the fumbling nature of it compared to the mastery of all this structure that's at play. Like, they're just so far beyond our thinking. And then to me it also fits in, like, you watch shows like the last 2 series of Westworld, and there's another series called Salvation where this guy, like, he's running his corporations and he's a billionaire with AIs and all that sort of stuff that releases a lot of technology into society and all that. It's a bit like Elon Musk guy, right? To me, there must be something very masterful instructing people, or a project implementation plan going on that has all these thousands of streams at big scale, like just the investment needed for the rollout of mobile phone networks and the gradual rising of technology in that apparatus to have all, you know, the sheer power output to handle all this sort of stuff. Because we've known that, say, you look at the power cables going into that technology, it's just like, that's not for what it is, right? And this is like the internet bodies, it just all makes sense. But those of you like me that have gone out into the communities to find answers have just been hacked, sidetracked, subverted, set up for failure, giving our perception authority away and all this sort of stuff, right? So I want to just round this out and leave it here, because I've got a lot more to offer on this theme. I hope this is it's like a very like tasty morsel that you want to get into of seeing how society unfolds. It will ideally the 3D into the multi-D as well and help you translate a lot. Maybe you've got unique variables, like I said, the outcome common, the menu unique of Dr. Wesson Price pattern. You might have unique menu variables for you, but it all fits into all this stuff, and it'll help you translate everything into your own context of seeing how you as a micro fit into the macro, and then ideally have the defense for it and stuff. And how I've just chipped away and offered all this stuff, it all roads lead to this frackery, right? So yeah, I hope that is really interesting. It's an interesting appreciation of history from someone that was in the trenches that maybe you don't know. I've offered a lot of variables. I don't know what clips I'll be using in this and stuff like that. It's probably going to be quite long and stuff, but I've got the second part of this that I might offer in part 3 after I release the David Adair. I don't really want to talk about stuff too much before I do it, but this is like the precursor to the fall of the Soviet Union sort of stuff, but how it was all manufactured and stuff, and that they always had an agenda. But you can just appreciate, like, they've got questions about this, of why this isn't adding up. And if you appreciate the multidimensional, the invader species, the Leviathan body skin suit and all this sort of stuff, ideally you take that data that I've shared, that it helps you translate all this. So ideally, like I said at the start, we're not 10 years behind or 30 years behind. I know I'm a lot further in front. I'm bringing that now to at least have a reference so we can do something about it, because we need to do it now and hold the line and develop ourselves, from my perspective, because it is masterful, it's structured and that, but engaging our abilities at the offering that I do in the Sovereignty Declaration, I feel all this stuff would not be needed if we were inferior, as I say. So what is our superiority? And that's where we need to go. And it's, you just got to get over your bullshit, your simple sort of wailing and inadequacy and all that sort of crap, worrying about like bringing other people aligned and stuff. You've got to be the best that you can be, not worried about anyone else. And a lot of people like shooting themselves in the foot, and I offered the Society Rewards the Victim sort of video a while ago, and Dr. Bob Beck, he talks about how the secondary benefits of being a false victim and all that sort of stuff, right? Just got to get over that stuff and be strong and anchor your stuff and master your emotions and all the stuff that I've offered over the years. It's time to really put it all together, right? Because there's definitely things underway, all right, and it's not ideal for us, and I feel like we've got this sort of window to do something about it. Otherwise it's going to be like, it's going to suck, right? So I really hope you get a lot from this. I hope this inspires you to really engage your pattern recognition to a whole new level. You also, like, you might feel intimidated by it, but then it's like, then perhaps what Andre's saying, we are superior, then what is that? Maybe it's time I get on to me and being my superior state that I can be, to ultimately be superior to all this, because GSF 36 that I offered, I worked out a lot, right? Once you get over that stuff, it's pretty straightforward, and that's where I've offered Infinite Potential Sovereignty Declaration version 5 that really nails it. So there's a really big section on the societal sort of structures going on, but this internet of bodies sort of stuff is very core to it, right? So I'll leave it there. It's getting late, and I've been talking a while and stuff, and I'll look to expand upon this series in the coming releases and stuff, and then ultimately get to this sort of era now and stuff and what's going on, and you know, the altered culminating future augmentation of humanity, all right? It's just fascinating, hey, right? It's just fascinating that there's beings out there that can work towards that and want that, and all because of control and maneuvering society in a direction that they have relevance and stuff like that, right? So I hope you get a lot from this. I hope you've really gained a lot from all that I've released in the years and stuff, and this is sort of putting it all together to then show you what you can do and navigate and then overcome it, and then wherever we as a species on this amazing planet go, right? So I thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey. I hope you get a lot from this, and until next time, Andre from Down Under, out. Bye for now. Take care. See you next time.
Everything's gonna be alright tonight. Oh yeah, my love for you is gonna keep on rising. The sun's gonna keep on shining, bright days on the horizon. My love for you will keep on rising. Everything's gonna be alright. The sun
down in December, heading for the city lights. 975, we sharing each other, nearer than farther. The scent of the lemon drips from your eyes. We are the people that rule the world, what's running in every boy and girl, all rejoicing in the world. Take me now. We can drive a little adventure, love in the summer, follow the sun tonight, reminiscing of the times of life. For each every other, the feeling is stronger. Shock at 11, got lost in your eyes. Can't do why when I think you're gonna leave me, but I'm gonna try. Are you gonna leave me now? Can't you be believing now? Can't do why when I think you're gonna leave me, but I'm gonna try. Are you gonna leave me now? Can't you be believing now? Can you remember in human eyes? It was to where we'd energize, lie in the sand and visualize like it's 75 again. We are the people that rule the world, what's running in every boy and girl, all rejoicing in the world. Take me now. We can drive. Can't do why when I think you're gonna leave me, but I'm gonna try. Are you gonna leave me now? Can't you be believing now? Can't do why when I think you're gonna leave me, but I'm gonna try. Are you gonna leave me now? Can't you be believing now? Know everything about you, know everything about me, know everything about us. I know everything about you, know everything about me, know everything about us. Can't do why when I think you're gonna leave me, but I'm gonna try. Are you gonna leave me now? Can't you be believing now? Can't do why when I think you're gonna leave me, but I'm gonna try. Are you gonna leave me now? Can't you be believing now?
John Lilly once put it this way: there are no limits at all to the human mind whatsoever, except those we impose on ourselves because of our beliefs. And those limits are also beliefs to be transcended. And that's a view that suggests that the possibilities of human transformation are virtually infinite. And we have no way of knowing the outer horizon of what it means to be human.
And really, to understand all this, everything, you have to go very, very deep into a study of history, consciousness, neurophysiology, everything. You have to be the supreme eclectic type of leaning, and you really have to be wanting to know who you are and what everything's about.
And the thing that you'll find when you go to sacred sites, if you're very humble about it, is that you are on a personal journey, and the sacred site will respond to you in a way that is appropriate only to you. The information is always what you are searching for. And it's the intent you give that energy that defines whether it is used for right action or not. And it is inside these sacred spaces that you will be reminded that you are a god, that you are a bright star.
So what you're trying to do is move through the course without ricocheting off walls or creating karma. You're trying to slide through things smoothly. How do you do that? It's called flowing. There's a technique that you can do that will allow you to touch some part of your inner being that has more knowledge than your conscious state does.